Greetings, minions, I am your humble narrator, Sideways Thinker, and I'm just here with an episode of Beg Your Pardon, the show in which I look at games, films, and books with a bit of seriousness. Today's video is one of a number I plan to make discussing one of my all-time favourite movies, The Devil's Carnival. For the unaware, The Devil's Carnival is an independent musical directed by Darren Lynn Bousman and written by Terence Zdunich. I'm not entirely certain whether or not I'm pronouncing either of those names correctly. These two were previously known for their collaboration on another one of my favourite films, the cyberpunk rock opera Repo, the Genetic Opera. The Devil's Carnival itself is part of a series, the second entry, The Devil's Carnival 2 Alleluia, having already been released in small numbers. Both the first and second films saw short-lived releases in limited edition sets ordered directly from the filmmakers themselves, these first runs for both films making only 6,660 copies. I currently own the limited releases of both films, but at the time of writing, the sequel is still on its way from the States, and as such, I can't talk about it yet. It may also be worth noting that both of the movies were made on a shoestring budget of $500,000, and are almost entirely self-funded by the creators themselves, as far as I can tell. On to the plot of the film itself. The Devil's Carnival is, largely, an experimental movie to my mind. The sequel is a feature-length film with a definite plot line, while the original is less than an hour long and only starts getting a whiff of an overall narrative in the final moments of the movie, with the song Grace for Sale, which remains my favourite of the original film's soundtrack. And that plot line is really just setting up to the events of a sequel that didn't release until several years later. The film follows three sinners sent to hell after committing a number of sins, each of which led them to being killed. John, who committed suicide, Tamara, who was killed by an abusive boyfriend, and Miss Merrywood, who was gunned down by the police. The story follows each of them in turn as they are introduced, their sins revealed, and their punishment meted out. It is worth noting that, for the most part, their punishments are brought on by their own misdeeds within hell, their refusal to resist the impulses that drive them to their sinful behaviour, damning them to an eternity of punishment. You may be asking yourselves what the point of this video actually is. Well, I'll tell you. In my experience, a number of people have an issue with why the sinners are in hell in the first place, and question exactly what their sin is, and if they are deserving of punishment. Personally, I think this is due to large-scale misinterpretation of exactly what it is each sinner is guilty of. So in this video I'm going to go through them one by one and break them down for you, as best I understand them. Then you can decide if their punishments were deserving for yourselves. Let us start out with the character that I think is the least arguable member of the cast, Miss Merrywood. With every single sinner in our story, our knowledge of them is very limited prior to the end of their lives. All we know of John is that his son is gone, of Tamara that she was in an abusive relationship, and of Miss Merrywood that she is a criminal of some description. It's never openly stated, but it's fairly clear to my mind at least that Merrywood is a jewel thief. When we are introduced to her, she is in the middle of a panicked retreat to her trailer, hiding a number of jewels underneath a large coat. Rather shortly after this, we hear sirens and the calls of the police. While we never outright see her die, just prior to what would seem to be the beginnings of a firefight, the scene becomes surreal as the door blasts open, allowing a flurry of bats to enter, and the Woe Maidens, carnies in service to the lesser carny Wick, enter to collect her and drag her to the Devil's Carnival. Her crime would seem fairly obvious. She is a thief. However, the morality of the Devil's Carnival is not so black and white as one would expect, nor is it as clear. The morality seems to be based more on the fables each character represents, rather than on standard Judeo-Christian tenets. To that end, it would seem to me that Merrywood is not so much a sinner because she is a thief, rather it is greed itself that is her downfall. The song associated with her is Penny for a Tale, which is itself based on the fable The Dog and its Reflection.
A penny for a tale. There once was a doggy. She pranced in the moon with a mouth full of shiny red pennies. She leapt and she wagged, so proud of her shiny red pennies, yipping with glee. She trotted by the river.
The story follows a hound carrying something in its mouth. In Penny for a Tale, the dog carries pennies, but the exact item carried is different depending on which version of the fable you are reading. The dog with its pennies passes a river, and upon looking into the river, sees itself. It mistakes itself for another dog with a better prize than the dog already has. This element being reinforced in the song Beautiful Stranger, in which the snake-like Carney, the twin, becomes a literal clone of Merrywood and offers a diamond to her if she can throw her pennies into an egg in a rigged carnival game. In the fable, the hound barks at its reflection and leaps after it, only to lose both the reflection's prize and its own to the river. As Lucifer says in the film itself,
Beware, lest you lose the substance by grasping at the shadow.
She is punished for her greed and for refusing to be satisfied with what she has, not for being a thief. The second sinner on our list is arguably the one most important to the plot of the film, and the one with which Lucifer gets most directly involved: John. As with Merrywood, we know next to nothing about his life except that it seems that he had a wife and that he has lost his son. It is unsure for much of the film if he believes the child dead or simply gone. He is brought to the carnival by Satan himself after a successful suicide attempt, clearly overwhelmed with emotion over the loss of his son. John spends much of his time wandering the carnival alone, catching glimpses of what he believes to be his son. It takes him quite some time to realise exactly where he is and why he is there. Aside from a few random encounters with a painted doll and the Woe Maidens, John is by and large left alone with his thoughts, until the ticket keeper himself takes pity on him and points him towards Lucifer's lair. Even when he knows where he is going, he is by and large left alone until he finds himself inside of Lucifer's throne room or office. It is when John is wandering alone that it is revealed to us which fable he represents: the fable Grief and His Due. It is a short story, so I'll read a version of it in its entirety. When Jupiter was assigning the various gods their privileges, it so happened that Grief was not present with the rest, but when all had received their share, he too entered and claimed his due. Jupiter was at a loss to know what to do, for there was nothing left for him. However, at last he decided that to him should belong the tears that are shed for the dead. Thus, it is the same with Grief as it is with the other gods. The more devoutly men render unto him his due, the more lavish he is with that which he has to bestow. It is not well, therefore, to mourn long for the departed, else Grief, whose sole pleasure is in such mourning, will be quick to send fresh cause for tears. Most people assume John has been sent to hell for suicide, but I disagree. I can see why many people would assume this. Suicide is considered a rather major sin in a great deal of religions, Judeo-Christian or otherwise, fit for severe punishment in the afterlife. However, suicide itself does not appear to be John's sin. Rather, as the fable suggests, it is grief. Rather than moving on with his life, he chose to wallow in his loss and wallow in his grief. It was that choice that damned him, not the method that lost him his life. What's more, this ties in well to the fact that, despite Lucifer's direct interest in John's case, which we later find out he intended to use against heaven, hell doesn't seem to react to him all that much. By and large, he torments himself. The song that deals with his sin, Grief, is a song to himself by himself. Lucifer's part in the song in the final film was a very late addition to my understanding to give the scene some more impact and to give our Dark Lord some more screen time. John is left alone to torment himself, because his own grief and guilt is more painful to him than anything hell can conjure up.
You're drowning in the grief of Jupiter's water. Let me open my tea and cradle you there. Is a bed for the boy and a rope for the father, both orphaned by heaven where no child is spared.
Finally, we move on to what is, in my experience, the most argued sinner of them all, Tamara. It is hard for a lot of people to pinpoint what her sin exactly is, and it's something I've argued with friends of mine more often than I'd like to admit. Her death was caused by an aggressive and hateful relationship coming to an abrupt end at the barrel of a gun. Even when in hell, she is seduced and then betrayed, rather than doing anything that seems deserving of punishment in and of itself. She doesn't harm anyone, and her only issue appears that she is a poor judge of character. Hardly something to be punished for eternity over. If that was her crime, then no. But her crime, to my mind, seems to be purposeful ignorance, rather than making bad decisions. The fable associated with Tamara is that of the scorpion and the frog. In essence, the fable follows a frog, who meets a charming scorpion and is seduced by him. The two of them swim away, the frog carrying the scorpion on her back. She worries, indeed knows, that the scorpion is liable to sting her as they swim, for it's in the nature of a scorpion to sting, but she agrees to travel with him regardless, so taken with him is she. As expected, the scorpion stings her, and they both drown. Tamara does much the same thing. She allows herself to be seduced by the carny known as the Scorpion, a pale-faced knife-thrower whose attire and plastic hair make him an absurd caricature of a 1950s bad boy rocker. He drops worrying hints as to the fate of his last wheel girl while attempting to seduce Tamara, and is even shown to be falsely leading her on when she follows him and sees him kissing the painted doll. She attempts to leave, at which he gets angry and claims she is a liar for not trusting him. She's intimidated into trusting him, and for her trust she is given a song and a stab wound, being impaled on the knife-throwing wheel by a knife thrown by the Scorpion himself.
So don't cry, cry baby, all dressed in green. How many kisses do you need? One for your tummy, one for your cheek, one for the devil inside of me.
It is obvious that he is a danger to her. It is obvious that he cannot be trusted, and yet she does so anyway. In a scene, which it is uncertain if it is canon or not, we see her in a similar situation. In the song In All My Dreams I Drown, she sings a duet with Lucifer in which she seems to be seduced by him as well, at the end of which her fate is left worryingly unknown. Her crime is deliberate ignorance. She has suffered from these kinds of men in the past, as we see when one shoots her, sending her to hell. It is heavily implied that she suffers this constantly. She makes the same mistakes over and over and over again, and doggedly refuses to accept the lesson the world keeps teaching her. This ignorance, this refusal to change her behaviour, even to save herself, is what renders her fit for punishment. Some people will still argue with me on that point, but I see it thusly. If a person is victimised, it is a shame. If it is consistent, it is a worse shame. However, if they are almost deliberately causing themselves to be victimised, as Tamara does, despite having endless chances to stop or avoid it, my sympathy is limited. If you keep making the same mistakes constantly, despite the world showing you how to avoid this mistake and the dire consequences of it, I lose all sympathy for you, and you deserve what you suffer. Well, I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Beg Your Pardon. I'll be covering this movie and its sequel again in a later episode, discussing the musical motifs found in the music of hell, and specifically the songs sung by the devil himself. But I'm afraid that's going to have to be all from me for now. I've been your humble narrator, Sideways Thinker, and as always, keep calm and carry on. Good day. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Well, I say that, I could have been having a terrible day when I made this video. You can't tell, and I certainly can't. Pre-recorded message and all that. All the same, if you're interested in seeing some live streaming stuff from me, if you look in the description, there will be a link to my Twitch page, as well as a link to my Twitter in case you want to keep up with all the random gibberish I spew throughout the week. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always donate to my Patreon campaign, also linked in the description. Well, that's all from me. This video's over. Leave. Now. Now!
Do not seek the sideways thinker. Do not seek the pardoner.